Welcome once again to The Curious Case. I'm Davis, and I'm so glad you're here for another quiet mystery. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what's the weather like where you are? Share it in the comments. And remember to subscribe so you never miss our next evening in Street Mary Mead. The morning began with silence. A soft, silver kind of quiet. Street. Mary Mead slept beneath a thin mist that clung to hedgerows and garden gates. The air carried the scent of dew and lilac. Far off, a church bell murmured the hour, slow and unhurried, as if time itself had no reason to rush. Miss Marple stood by her window, a cup of tea steaming gently between her hands. Her shawl rested across her shoulders, and her eyes clear, bright, endlessly curious, watched the lane below. Nothing unusual. Only the milk cart. Only Mr. Harris cycling past the post office. The same world she'd known for years, moving in its own small rhythm. Peaceful, predictable, comforting. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to quiet mornings and well-ordered lives. Yet, beneath that calm, something else stirred a faint unease, like a thread tugged somewhere out of sight. Habit drew her outside. Her cane tapped softly against the path as she stepped into the mist. The morning chill kissed her cheeks. Birds rustled in the hedges. Every sound gentle, harmless, felt perfectly right. Until one didn't. It came suddenly, a sound too sharp for morning peace. She stopped, tilted her head, listened. Not the bell, not the milk cart. Something closer. A cry, or perhaps a shout, cut short, swallowed by the fog. Miss Marple's steps slowed. Her breath left a small cloud in the air. The stillness returned, but not quite the same. She turned toward Miller's Field, the lane bending into white mist. For a moment, she thought she saw movement. A figure, a shadow. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her fingers tightened around. The cane, the village, so ordinary, suddenly felt watchful, the kind of quiet that holds its breath. She exhaled slowly. Strange, she murmured. Then listened again, but the sound was gone. Only the mist remained, curling like thought around her. A dog barked once, far off. Then nothing. Miss Marple lingered at the gate, eyes narrowing toward the field. Something had changed. She couldn't yet name it, but she felt it. Something had disturbed the peace of Street Mary Mead. The sound came again, faint, urgent, not the kind that belonged to morning peace. Miss Marple paused by the hedgerow, her breath visible in the cool air. The mist curled low around the fields, soft as wool, but the quiet had changed. It was thinner now, uneasy. She heard voices scattered, uncertain, drifting through the fog like whispers without faces. Then another sound, a man's shout, quick, rough, cut off too soon. Her steps quickened. The gravel under her shoes crackled in protest. Each one felt louder than it should. She followed the lane that curved toward Miller's Field, the place where children usually played with sticks and dogs chased crows. Not today. Figures were gathering at the edge of the meadow, shapes half lost in the mist. A handful of villagers stood in a tight cluster, their words blended into one trembling murmur. Miss Marple slowed. Her voice, calm but firm, reached them first. What's happened? Someone turned Mr. Peters, the farmer, his face pale beneath his cap. Best not come closer, Miss Marple, he said quickly. There's been an accident. His eyes flickered, not meeting hers. That was never a good sign. She walked forward anyway. The crowd parted with the strange obedience that sorrow brings. The ground ahead was darker, flattened grass, a coat sleeve against the earth. Then she saw him, a young man, face turned upward toward the morning sky that couldn't see him anymore, his hair damp with dew, his collar twisted. Stillness everywhere. No one spoke. Even the mist seemed to pause around him. Miss Marple knelt slowly, careful not to disturb the scene. Her hand hovered just above the grass. There, beside his shoulder, something caught the weak sunlight. Metal, a cufflink, silver. It glinted faintly through the dew, one half sunk into mud, as if the field itself wanted to keep it. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Only looked. The pattern was fine, almost custom. Not the sort of thing one wore for a morning walk. The faint scent of oil lingered in the air, sharp, out of place among the damp earth and crushed grass. A pocket watch ticked weakly nearby, half buried, still running. Time refusing to stop, even for death. Miss Marple exhaled softly. Behind her, someone began to cry. Another whispered a prayer. But she was quiet, utterly still, listening to the silence between their words. Then she straightened, her eyes steady, voice low. "Send for the inspector," she said. This was no accident. Mr. Peters swallowed hard. You think," she didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on the silver cufflink, the broken calm, the echo of what had once been peace. She saw it, and everything changed. Inspector Braithwaite arrived just as the mist began to lift. A tall man, coat buttoned high, eyes narrowed against the pale light. He moved with quiet purpose, nodding briefly to the constables marking the ground. Miss Marple stood a few steps back, her hands folded neatly around her cane. She did not intrude, not yet. But her gaze was fixed on the body with calm precision, the kind that comes from a lifetime of seeing too much and saying very little. The inspector knelt. "Male," he murmured. "Young. No sign of robbery." He turned the wrist gently, studying the watch still ticking faintly beneath the sleeve. "Stopped at nothing," Miss Marple said softly. He looked up. "Pardon?" She smiled faintly. "I meant the watch, Inspector. It's still running. That tells its own story." He glanced at her, half amused, half curious. "You always notice the small things, don't you, Miss Marple?" "Only the things others overlook," she replied gently. "They tend to be the important ones." He rose, brushing the damp from his trousers. "Seems he was struck," he said. "A single blow, right temple. Blunt instrument, heavy. Likely a fall afterward. We'll know more when the doctor arrives." Miss Marple nodded, eyes drifting again to the cufflink glinting faintly in the grass. She pointed with the tip of her cane. "That, Inspector. You've placed it in a bag, yes?" He held it up. "Found beside him. Expensive by the look. Custom made," she murmured. "You recognize it?" "Not the piece itself, but the quality. London work, I'd say. Silver chased with a spiral pattern. A gift, perhaps. Or something lent." He studied her, thoughtful. "You think it belongs to the victim?" Her head tilted slightly. "No. The polish tells otherwise. This man, look at his boots, worn but brushed. His hands, calloused. A worker, not a gentleman of fashion. That cufflink came from another world entirely." The inspector made a note, pen scratching quietly in the mist. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were fixed not on his notebook, but on the face of the dead. Something about it. The angle of the jaw, the faint scar beneath the chin stirred memory. She frowned. "I've seen him before," she said slowly. The inspector paused. "Where?" She shook her head, thoughtful. "Not here, but near. The post office, perhaps, or at Mrs. Pritchard's shop." He was laughing, I recall, and someone called his name. The sound of the church bell drifted faintly across the field, soft but solemn. Miss Marple's eyes lifted toward it, then back to the still figure at her feet. The mist was thinning now. Faces were clearer. The truth, still hidden, was beginning to breathe. Her expression softened. Not fear, not shock, only understanding. She whispered, almost to herself. The body was known to her. The cottage stood at the far end of the lane, half hidden by lilac and ivy, curtains drawn, a place holding its breath. Miss Marple paused by the gate. The hinges creaked soft, uncertain as if even the metal shared the grief inside. She stepped through quietly. No need to knock loudly in a house that had already heard enough noise. Inside, the air was still. The kind of stillness that comes after long weeping, candles half burned. A cup of tea left cold beside the Bible on the table. Martha, the mother, sat in her chair by the hearth, her face pale, eyes swollen, hands folded tight in her lap. She did not rise. She only looked up when Miss Marple's soft voice broke the silence. "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, "I came to see how you were bearing up." Martha nodded faintly, the motion more reflex than reply. "People mean well," she whispered. "They bring food, flowers, words. None of it fills the space." Miss Marple moved closer, her steps barely sounding against the rug. "I know," she said, "but sometimes words, when small enough, can help hold the silence together." The old clock ticked between them, a long, patient rhythm that made the air feel heavier. On the sofa sat two others, Charlie the son, eyes on the floor, jaw set tight, and Emily the daughter, composed, too composed, her hands clasped neatly, her face calm in a way that didn't belong to grief. Miss Marple's eyes drifted gently between them. Charlie's boot tapped the floor fast, restless. Emily's gaze stayed on the cold teacup, two silences, one boiling, one frozen. "You were close to him?" Miss Marple asked softly. Emily's voice was low. "He was my brother." A pause. "And your friend?" Another pause. Longer this. Time. Her lips pressed thin. "Of course," she said, but her tone, too careful, too measured, left a question hanging. Martha shifted slightly, dabbing her eyes. "He was good to us," she murmured. "Always working, always thinking of others." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze resting on the family photographs on the mantel. 3 children, one smiling wider than the rest. She leaned closer, studying the frame. The glass was cracked, a clean break across the eldest boy's face. Accident, perhaps, but not repaired. Miss Marple said nothing. She only touched Martha's hand, warm and trembling. "Take care of yourself, my dear. Grief is heavy enough without secrets trying to carry it." As she rose to leave, she glanced once more toward Emily. The girl's eyes met hers calm, almost steady. But something flickered there. Guilt, maybe, or fear wearing its best disguise. Outside, the air smelled of rain. Miss Marple closed the gate gently behind her. Grief had its own lies. By the next morning, the village was humming, not with birdsong but with voices. Soft, careful, and edged with curiosity. Street Mary Mead had never loved silence for long. By breakfast, everyone knew about the young man in the field. By noon, they'd already begun rewriting his life. Miss Marple walked to the post office, her basket swinging lightly at her side. She didn't hurry. She didn't need to. The truth always came to her one sentence at a time, carried on teacups and folded letters. Inside, the air smelled of paper and peppermint. Mrs. Whitaker stood behind the counter, eyes wide with news she could barely contain. "Oh, Miss Marple," she began, lowering her voice. "You've heard, haven't you?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "A little." Mrs. Whitaker leaned forward. "Terrible business. Poor lad found in the mud, they say. And such a nice boy, too. Always polite." She paused, letting the next word fall like a secret. "But you never really know people, do you?" Miss Marple nodded gently. "No, one never does." Behind them, the door opened. 2 women entered, Mrs. Barton and Mrs. Green, both whispering before they even crossed the threshold. "Dr. Thomas was seen in the lane that night," Mrs. Barton said. "He told the constable he was visiting a patient," replied Mrs. Green. "But who?" They both turned, pretending to study envelopes while listening to their own echo. Mrs. Whitaker tutted softly. "Doctors and their secrets. Though I always said his wife looked delicate." Mrs. Barton sighed. "And that brother Charlie, is it? Never worked a proper day. Always drinking at the Swan." Miss Marple thanked them for the stamps, her voice polite, steady. She did not correct them. She did not interrupt. She only listened the way one listens to the ticking of a clock. At the market it was the same. Mr. Hodge, the grocer, whispered as he weighed the apples. "They say the inspector's looking at the family. The sister, too quiet. The mother, too calm." He wrapped the paper slowly, as if gossip needed time to breathe. Outside, by the bakery, more voices tangled together. Different versions of the same story, all polished by imagination. Each one claimed to know the truth. Each one contradicted the last. Miss Marple passed through them like a shadow, nodding kindly, never speaking first. Every rumor was a thread, every silence a knot, and somewhere inside that knot, the truth waited. As she turned toward home, the church bell tolled again, long, low, and thoughtful. A breeze carried the scent of yeast and lilac through the lane, and under the chatter, under the sigh of the day, one name kept returning, again and again. Rain had come in the night. By morning, the lanes of street, Mary Mead shone with silver puddles and bent flowers. Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting half-forgotten, eyes drifting toward the 5. Misted fields beyond. A knock came at the door. Firm, familiar, Inspector Braithwaite. He stepped in, removing his hat, his coat damp with drizzle. "Forgive me, Miss Marple," he said. "I've just come from the coroner. Thought you'd want to hear what we've found." She poured tea before answering. News always sounds softer with a cup in hand. He smiled faintly, accepting it, but his shoulders told another story. "The post-mortem's complete," he began. "Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. A single blow, likely from something round and heavy, a hammer perhaps, or a paperweight." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "A clean strike, then. Not struggle, not frenzy." "Exactly," he said. "Too clean. But that's not what troubles me." He opened his notebook, tapping the page with his pen. The coroner fixed the time of death between 9 and 10 that night. But listen to this. Henry was last seen leaving the shop at 6. His family claims he never came home. Yet his shoes, he paused, leaning forward, were spotless. No mud, no grass stains, not a speck from Miller's Field. If he walked there that night, he did it without touching the earth. Miss Marple looked toward the rain, slick lane. "Strange," she murmured. "The field's been damp for days." The inspector sighed, closing the book. "And another thing, his coat unbuttoned, torn at the shoulder, but his shirt beneath, pressed, dry, as if changed. The coroner says it's unlikely he died where we found him." He rubbed his temple, frustration creeping through the weariness. "I hate puzzles like this, Miss Marple. Every piece fits, until it doesn't." She stirred her tea once, twice, then set the spoon down. "Sometimes, Inspector, the picture isn't wrong," she said softly. "Only the frame." He frowned slightly. "Meaning?" She smiled, the smallest curve of her lips. "You're looking for when he died, but perhaps you should ask where." The room fell quiet. Outside, the rain eased to a whisper against the glass. Miss Marple leaned back, eyes thoughtful, voice low. "A body left in a field tells one story," she said, "but clothes tell another. Someone cared enough to place him where he'd be found, not hidden, not buried. A message, perhaps. Or guilt." The inspector looked up sharply. "Then you believe he was moved?" She nodded once. "Moved carefully, by someone who knew him well. Someone who couldn't bear for him to vanish completely." He exhaled, long and slow. "And that someone," he said quietly, "is still in this village." Miss Marple's gaze met his, calm and certain. "Yes," she murmured. "But he didn't die there, Inspector. Not in that field." Her eyes darkened with quiet knowing. "He died somewhere else, before they brought him here." The house stood on the edge of the village, neat as a picture. White walls, trimmed hedges, windows polished until they caught the clouds. Miss Marple paused by the gate, taking in the view with quiet curiosity. A perfect home, the kind that smiled too widely. She lifted the latch gently and walked up the path lined with rose bushes, each one pruned to identical shape. Dr. Thomas opened the door before she could knock twice. He was, as she remembered him, tall, calm, his expression smooth as porcelain. "Miss Marple," he said warmly. "What an unexpected pleasure. Please, do come in." She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the gleam. Everything shone: the brass handles, the marble tiles, even the vase of lilies by the stair. A house scrubbed of fingerprints, a house afraid of dust. "How lovely your home looks," she said softly. He smiled. "My wife takes great pride in it. She believes order keeps the mind at peace." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the mantel. Photographs, arranged perfectly, none out of line. A family portrait in the center. But something odd. The frame bore a faint crack, almost invisible, running across his wife's face. She moved closer, her voice gentle. "It's rare to see such care, Doctor. You must both have steady hands." He gave a short laugh. "Comes with the profession, I suppose." A sound broke the moment the faint clink of china from the adjoining room. "Ah," he said. "That'll be Beatrice. Tea, no doubt." When she entered, Miss Marple turned slightly, taking her in. Beatrice Thomas, fair, delicate, eyes downcast. She smiled, but not with her mouth. Only her hands trembled, just once, as she set the tray down. Miss Marple thanked her kindly. The woman nodded, retreating almost too quickly. The doctor noticed. "She's been nervous since the news," he said. "Terrible thing what happened. She's not been sleeping well." Miss Marple stirred her tea, eyes on the steam. "Tragedy unsettles even the strongest," she murmured. Then softly, "Did you know the young man?" Dr. Thomas hesitated, barely a heartbeat. "Only in passing. He delivered supplies to the clinic. Reliable enough, though prone to carelessness." His tone was even, but his fingers tapped the armrest once, twice, too precisely, too rehearsed. Miss Marple smiled politely, setting her cup down. "Carelessness is such a human trait," she said. "Still, the world seems to punish it most severely." His smile froze for half a second before returning. "Indeed," he said. "You speak as though you've seen it happen." "Oh," she replied, standing slowly. "I often do." Her eyes wandered again, the spotless floor, the perfect roses outside the window, the faint smell of polish masking something faintly metallic underneath. At the door, she turned back once more. "You keep a lovely home, Doctor," she said. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were not. "Though," she added softly, "perfection always hides a crack." The rain had stopped by afternoon. Sunlight slipped through the lace curtains in pale stripes, touching the floor like quiet questions. Miss Marple sat once more in the Thomas drawing-room. The air smelled faintly of polish and lilies. Too sweet, too careful. Dr. Thomas stood by the window, his hands behind his back, posture immaculate. He was speaking of the clinic, of his patients, of everything except what mattered. It was the sort of talk one used to keep the truth out of the room. "I can't imagine what the inspector expects to find," he said lightly. "The poor fellow in the field was just unfortunate." "Unfortunate," Miss Marple repeated, her voice soft. "Yes, that word often hides more than it says." He smiled thin, professional. "You have a way of making things sound significant, Miss Marple." "I find," she replied, "that life usually is." At that moment, the door opened quietly. Beatrice Thomas stepped in, carrying a tray with fresh tea. Her hands trembled slightly, though the cups did not clink. She moved with the care of someone who had learned to avoid mistakes. "Thank you, my dear," the doctor said. His tone was kind, too kind. Beatrice set the tray down, then turned to pour. That's when Miss Marple saw it, the mark on her hand. Small, round, dark against the pale skin near the knuckle. A burn. Healing, but fresh enough to sting. Beatrice noticed her gaze and drew her hand back quickly, folding it beneath the other. "Oh," she murmured. "Clumsy of me. The stove last week." Her smile came too quickly, practiced, fragile. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "The stove can be treacherous," she said. "Still, that looks rather deliberate." Beatrice froze for a heartbeat, then laughed softly. "Oh, nothing like that, I assure you." But her eyes flicked toward her husband. Just once. Fast. Unthinking. Dr. Thomas turned smoothly, his smile unbroken. "Yes," he said. "My wife insists on cooking, though we have help enough. She refuses to be idle." He placed a gentle hand on Beatrice's shoulder. It looked affectionate from a distance, but her posture stiffened beneath it. Miss Marple stirred her tea slowly. Once. Twice. The sound of the spoon filled the silence. "How admirable," she said finally. "Some women can't stand stillness. They say it gives them time to think. Beatrice's hand trembled again. The cup rattled against the saucer. Dr. Thomas chuckled lightly. My wife thinks far too much already. Beatrice smiled, small, polite, and utterly empty. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on that hidden hand. The burn was no accident of a stove. It was too round, too even, too cruel. She rose, thanking them both for tea, her voice calm, her eyes quiet. At the doorway, she looked back once. Beatrice avoided her gaze. The doctor did not. Such lovely weather returning, Miss Marple said softly. But sometimes the sun only makes the shadows sharper. Outside, the wind stirred through the rose bushes. The petals trembled. And Miss Marple knew. That wasn't an accident. The village was quiet again, too quiet. Evening light stretched long across the lane, gold turning slowly to grey. Miss Marple walked home alone, her shawl drawn close, her thoughts moving faster than her steps. Behind her, the Thomas house faded into distance, perfect roses, perfect windows, perfect lies. The air smelled faintly of rain and something sharper, something metallic that lingered on her mind. She walked slowly, the sound of her cane keeping rhythm with her thoughts. Tap, pause, tap. Each step another question waiting to be answered. She spoke softly, as if the mist itself were listening. When people polish too hard, she murmured, it's never just the silver, it's their conscience. A cat darted across the road ahead, slipping through the hedge. The sound startled her for only a moment, then she smiled faintly. Old habits, she thought. Fear and instinct often came in the same disguise. The sun had nearly gone. Lamps began to flicker behind cottage curtains. Voices from inside drifted through the still air, gentle, ordinary, untroubled. How easily people returned to comfort while truth still wandered in the dark. She stopped by the church wall, resting her hand on the cool stone. From here she could see the bell tower, shadowed against the dimming sky. A single bell tolled the hour, slow, mournful, familiar. She counted each note like footsteps in a memory. 9 chimes. The hour Henry had died. Her gaze lowered to the path. Damp soil, faint footprints, 2 sets, close together, leading toward the field. Then none, washed away by the rain. Even footprints, she whispered, are honest only while they last. She began walking again, slower now, her mind sifting through the puzzle. The cufflink, the shoes, the burn, pieces that did not belong to chance. Guilt, she thought, always leaves its signature, even when written in silence. Someone had tried to erase it, someone meticulous, someone afraid. At the turn near the vicarage, a gust of wind lifted her shawl. She reached to steady it, then paused. The street was empty, yet the feeling came sudden, cold, unmistakable, the sense that she was not alone. She turned slightly, eyes narrowing toward the hedgerow. Nothing moved. Only the faint ripple of leaves, the quiet hum of evening insects. Still, she knew. Observation had a presence. You could feel it, the same way one feels warmth unseen but undeniable. Her hand tightened on the cane. She continued walking, measured and calm. The watcher, whoever they were, would see no fear. At her gate, she looked once more over her shoulder. The lane was still. The mist beginning to rise again. She opened the gate slowly, the latch clicking like a whisper in the quiet. Then, very softly, almost to herself, she said. Someone was watching her. The evening settled softly over Street Mary Mead. Smoke rose from chimneys, thin and blue, fading into dusk. Inside her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, a small flame, steady and thoughtful. The quiet should have been comforting. But it wasn't. A knock came. Hesitant. 2 short taps. Then one more, softer, almost unsure of itself. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her shawl. When she opened the door, she found Agatha, her maid, standing on the step, wringing her hands. Her apron was damp at the corners, her face pale from more than the cold. "Come in, my dear," Miss Marple said gently. No sense letting the wind do the talking. Agatha stepped inside, eyes darting to the floor. She spoke in a rush, words tripping over fear. I shouldn't be here, ma'am, but I couldn't keep quiet. Not after what I heard. Miss Marple poured tea, slow and calm. Truth, she said softly, tends to knock quietly. Sit, and let's hear her voice. Agatha sat, twisting her fingers together. It's about the Thomases, ma'am, about Dr. Thomas, and that poor man they found. Her breath caught. I was at the vicarage 2 nights before it happened, delivering linen, and I saw them. Saw whom, dear? Henry and Miss Emily, Agatha whispered. Arguing. In the garden behind the cottage. He was angry. Oh, I've never heard him shout like that. Said she was ruining herself. Said he'd tell their mother everything. Miss Marple's eyes softened. And Miss Emily? She begged him to stop, Agatha said, her voice shaking. Cried that she loved someone. Someone her brother would never approve of. A pause. She didn't say who. The fire cracked softly between them. Miss Marple leaned back, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Love, she murmured, has caused more trouble than poverty ever could. Agatha nodded, tears gathering. There's more. The doctor, he came by the next evening. Late. I saw his car near the gate. He went inside, ma'am. And that was the last time anyone saw Henry alive. The room fell silent. Only the small clock on the mantel ticked, marking each word she didn't speak. Miss Marple looked into the fire, her expression calm, her thoughts moving like shadows across the flame. So, she said quietly, the brother was angry, the sister afraid, and the doctor conveniently near. Agatha swallowed hard. Do you think he... Miss Marple lifted her hand. No, my dear. I never think before I see. But I do notice when hearts beat too fast around the truth. She stood, walking to the window. Outside, dusk had deepened. The village lay wrapped in its usual calm. But calm had become a costume, and she could see the seams beginning to show. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Love had started the quarrel, and ended it. Section 10. The confidant arrives. 500 words. Night had deepened over Street Mary Mead. The lamps along the lane flickered softly, throwing halos onto the damp cobblestones. Inside her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the hearth, the glow of the fire warming her shawl and her thoughts alike. She had been waiting, not intentionally, but in that quiet, knowing way she often did, when the world felt as though it were about to speak. And then it did. A knock, light but hurried. 3 taps, a pause, then one more. She opened the door to find Agatha, her maid, pale, nervous, eyes darting toward the darkness behind her. Forgive me, ma'am, she said. It's late, I know, but I've something I must tell you. Then best not keep it waiting, Miss Marple said kindly. Come in, my dear. Sit by the fire before your courage cools. Agatha stepped inside, clutching her hands together. Her breath came uneven, her words tumbling out in fragments. It's about the family, ma'am, Martha and the children. There was a quarrel, a dreadful one, 2 nights before he was found. Miss Marple poured her tea, calm and unhurried. Tell me exactly what you heard. Agatha swallowed. I was delivering linen near the back lane. The window was open. I didn't mean to listen, but their voices, well, they carried. She hesitated. Henry was shouting. Angry. He said Emily was bringing shame. Said she'd ruin them all for a man she wouldn't name. Miss Marple's hands were still. And the girl? She was crying, ma'am, begging him not to interfere. Said she loved the man. Said she'd rather die than give him up. Agatha's voice trembled. Then the mother came in, tried to stop them, but Henry slammed the door and left the house. That was the last they saw of him alive. The clock ticked softly in the corner. Miss Marple stared into the fire, her face thoughtful. The flames rose and fell like breathing. Love, she said quietly, is a fine excuse for bravery and a terrible one for silence. Agatha nodded weakly. There's more, she whispered. Dr. Thomas came by later that evening. I saw his car outside their gate. I didn't think much of it then, but now... She broke off, glancing toward the window, as though afraid someone might be listening even now. Miss Marple's voice remained gentle. Fear never tells the full story, my dear. It only shows who's been hurt the most. Agatha wiped her eyes. You think the doctor? I think, Miss Marple said softly, that truth hides behind affection more often than behind anger. The fire crackled. Outside, the church bell marked the hour, slow, deliberate, final. Agatha stood, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't keep it to myself, ma'am. Miss Marple smiled faintly. You did right, my dear. You always do. She watched her leave, then turned back to the fire, the flames reflected in her calm, knowing eyes. Love, she murmured, had started the quarrel and ended it. Rain came again before dawn, soft, steady, unhurried, the kind of rain that makes the world smaller, quieter, as if it's thinking too. Miss Marple sat at her writing desk, the window cracked open just enough for the scent of wet lilac to drift in. Her teacup had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. The knock at her door was faint, barely a whisper against the storm. When she opened it, no one was there. Only the sound of rain and the weight of something small on the step. A letter. Plain paper. No seal. Her name written in hurried ink. Miss J. Marple, Street Mary Mead. She picked it up carefully, the edges damp. No return address. No mark of where it came from. Inside, a single sheet. 4 sentences. No greeting. No signature. You were right about the field. He didn't die there. Ask who unlocked the gate. Please don't tell her I wrote. Miss Marple read it twice. Then a third time, her eyes narrowing slightly with each line. The ink smudged faintly beneath her thumb, still wet in places. Someone had written it recently. Very recently. She carried it to the firelight. The handwriting not practiced, but urgent. Each letter slanted left, a sign of haste or fear. She placed the note on the table and stared at it. Words often said more in what they didn't include. Not he, but her. The writer feared a woman's anger, not a man's. That alone narrowed the circle. Her gaze lifted to the window, to the blurred garden beyond. Rain traced faint lines across the glass like tears running backward. The gate. It had been locked the morning of the murder. Inspector Braithwaite mentioned it himself. Only 3 people kept keys, the farmer, the vicar, and Dr. Thomas. Miss Marple tapped the edge of the paper lightly. A faint scent rose from it, not tobacco, not perfume. Soap. Lavender soap. The same kind Beatrice. Thomas used at the clinic. She closed her eyes for a moment. A confession by fear. A plea written in secrecy. And still, no name. The rain softened, and in its hush she heard it again, the faint echo of footsteps passing beyond the hedge. A watcher, careful. Or perhaps a messenger returning to see if the letter had been found. Miss Marple didn't move to the door. She didn't need to. She folded the note neatly, slid it into her pocket, and whispered to the quiet room. Truth always travels by hand. Then she looked again at the page, its blurred edges, its trembling words, its unfinished courage, and saw what mattered most. The ink was still wet. The morning came pale and grey. A thin fog lingered above the rooftops, soft as breath. Miss Marple walked to the green, her steps measured, her mind restless beneath the calm. The letter still sat folded in her pocket, dry now, but its meaning as damp as when she'd found it. Truth never came tidy. It came smudged and afraid. At the edge of the green she found Mr. Jennings, the old caretaker from the vicarage. He was sweeping the path, as he did every morning, though the broom seemed more excuse than purpose. He looked up as she approached, his lined face half hidden by the brim of his cap. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said softly. "You're early out." "I might say the same of you," she replied, smiling. "The fog makes good company, does it not?" He chuckled faintly. "Aye, company that doesn't answer back." Then his tone changed, a pause, a hesitation. "They say you're helping the inspector with the business of the poor lad." "I listen more than I help," she said, though sometimes listening leads to seeing. The broom slowed, his eyes flicked to the lane, then back to her. "I saw something, you know. Didn't think it mattered." "Most things that don't seem to matter," she murmured, "often do." He leaned on the broom, lowering his voice. "It was the night before they found him. I was closing up the vicarage shed near Miller's Field. Saw lantern light down by the gate. Lantern light? Aye. Moving slow. I thought it were the farmer at first, but the shape no, too slim. I called out, but they didn't answer. He rubbed his hands together, uneasy. Then another shape joined the first, taller. They stood talking a while. Then the taller one lifted something like a bag into the cart. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. 2 people? He nodded. Aye. And one of them was the doctor. That I'd swear to. Are you sure? He looked ashamed, as if afraid of his own certainty. Near sure, ma'am. I saw the shine of his coat buttons when the light swung round. He always wears that black overcoat, the one polished like a mirror. You could spot it from the church tower. Miss Marple's hand brushed the pocket where the letter rested. Did you tell the inspector? Jennings shook his head. No. Folk in this village don't take kindly to being seen where they shouldn't be, but now... He glanced at her, eyes wet with worry. Now I think someone should know. She laid a hand on his arm. You did right to tell me, Mr. Jennings. Silence is a kind of guilt when it grows too heavy. He nodded once, then turned back to his sweeping slower now, as though each stroke carried a secret. Miss Marple looked toward the field, through the mist. 2 figures, 1 lantern, 1 cart. Her breath left in a quiet whisper. He wasn't alone that night. The day broke with pale sunlight, soft and cold across the rooftops. Mist still lingered near the hedges, curling like thoughts that refused to settle. Miss Marple arrived at the vicarage where Inspector Braithwaite had made his temporary office. The door stood open. Inside, papers lay spread across the table like a map of confusion. The inspector looked up as she entered, his expression tight, controlled, but tired. Miss Marple, he said, I believe we've got it now. She smiled faintly. Do tell. He gestured to the file before him. All the evidence points to the sister, Miss Emily. The argument, the timing, her silence since the death. And this letter we found in her drawer. He held up the page, its edges creased, its handwriting trembling. She wrote it the night before he died. Reads like a confession. Miss Marple didn't move closer. She only tilted her head slightly. And what does it confess, Inspector? That she couldn't bear his interference, he said. That she'd rather he disappear than ruin everything. Her eyes lowered to the page, her tone calm. Disappear, not die. The inspector frowned. It's the same thing in context. Context, she repeated softly, has a way of changing shape when one listens to the heart, not the pen. He sighed, rubbing his temple. We can't build a case on feelings, Miss Marple. We've got a quarrel, motive, and handwriting to prove intent. Miss Marple reached for the cup of tea beside him, her voice light. Do you recall, Inspector, what you said about his shoes? Spotless. Yes, of course. And yet, she said, his sister's gloves were stained with soil. Not from digging, not from work, just enough to lift a gate latch. The same gate you told me was locked. He hesitated. You're suggesting... I'm suggesting, she interrupted softly, that she opened it, yes, but not to commit a murder, to let someone else in. The inspector's brow furrowed. You think she's protecting someone? Miss Marple nodded gently. When people lie, Inspector, they rarely lie for themselves. They lie for those they love. He leaned back, the paper drooping in his hand. The evidence is clear, he muttered. She smiled, kind, patient, unshaken. Evidence, she said, quietly, is often polite enough to agree with whoever asks it the loudest. But behavior, Inspector. Her eyes met his. Behavior tells the truth even when words do not. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working, the silence between them deep as the morning mist. Outside, a crow cried once, sharp and echoing through the village. The kind of sound that makes certainty stumble. Miss Marple set down her cup, stood slowly, and reached for her shawl. The letter proves nothing, she said. Watch her face when you ask about it. Not her words. Her face. She turned toward the door, her voice fading into the quiet. Evidence lies, behavior does not. Evening had returned to Street Mary Mead. The same hour. The same quiet. the same mist rolling low over Miller's Field. Miss Marple stood at the gate, her hand resting on the latch. The iron felt cold beneath her fingers. It always did, she thought, when truth waited nearby. The inspector had left hours ago. The village slept, confident that justice would sort itself by morning. But Miss Marple knew better. Justice seldom moved without a gentle push. She stepped inside the field. The grass was soft beneath her shoes, damp from the evening dew. No lanterns, no footprints visible, just silence and memory. She walked slowly, retracing the path from the lane to where the body had been found. Each step measured, each breath deliberate. She let her mind replay what she'd been told, the quarrel, the argument, the unlocked gate, the spotless shoes, details like threads, waiting to be woven. She stopped near the hedge where the cart had been seen. Kneeling slightly, she brushed her fingers across the ground. The soil had hardened since the rain, but faint impressions remained, not of boots, but of smaller soles. Women's shoes, one set leading toward the center of the field, another turning back. She followed the first set. The grass grew shorter near the dot center, pressed in a circle that spoke of struggle brief, silent, final. Then her eyes caught something glinting faintly under a tuft of clover. She bent closer, a small chain. Silver, delicate, the clasp broken clean. Not a man's, not a laborer's, a woman's. She turned it in her fingers, watching how the weak light caught on the links. The doctor's wife wore pearls, she recalled, but the sister Emily always a chain, tucked under her collar, until the day of the funeral, when it was gone. Miss Marple closed her hand around it. It wasn't proof, it was pattern. And patterns, she thought, were what truth used when it couldn't speak aloud. She stood again, looking toward the lane. The distance was short, too short for a body to be carried unseen, yet Mr. Jennings swore he saw the cart. The field hadn't lied, only the time had. The body had been placed there later, under the cover of rain. Her eyes drifted down once more. The shorter footprints had doubled back, but a third set appeared faint, deliberate, as though someone had walked beside the wheel tracks, someone who wanted to hide the drag marks. She knelt once more, touching the bent blades. They leaned east, not west. Toward the vicarage path, she smiled faintly. Nature, unlike people, didn't know how to deceive. A gust of wind rippled across the meadow, carrying the smell of wet earth and lilac. The world, it seemed, had begun to whisper. She looked down at the crushed grass, at the faint, truthful trail it had left behind, and breathed out softly. The grass told her everything. The night was long and sleepless. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of it damp, metallic, waiting. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting untouched in her lap. She wasn't thinking about the field now. She was thinking about fear, how quietly it moved, how neatly it dressed itself as reason. A knock came, soft, uneven. Then again quicker, trembling, as though courage might run out if it waited too long. Miss Marple rose, candle in hand, and opened the door. Beatrice Thomas stood there, her face pale, her eyes hollowed by something deeper than exhaustion. Her coat was thrown on over her nightdress, the hem soaked through with mud. "Please," she whispered. "I had nowhere else to go." Miss Marple stepped aside without a word. The kettle began to hum on the stove, the sound of warmth returning to the room. "Sit, my dear," she said softly, "and breathe." Beatrice sat by the fire, hands clenched around themselves. She looked small, like someone trying to hold her body still while her mind ran in circles. "I can't stay there," she said. "Not tonight. Not after what I found." Her voice cracked. Miss Marple poured tea, calm, patient. "Found?" she asked gently. Beatrice reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter, folded, creased, and wet around the edges. She handed it to Miss Marple with shaking fingers. "I was cleaning the study," she said, "and it fell from behind the clock." Her eyes filled. "He hid it, Miss Marple. He hid it from me. The paper was heavier than it looked." Miss Marple opened it slowly. The writing inside was unmistakable, the same slant, the same trembling hand that had written the first note. I tried to make it right. I went to the field, but it was already done. I didn't mean to help him, but he said it would look worse if we told the truth. I thought it was mercy. I see now it was murder. The signature was smudged, unreadable, but one line at the bottom hadn't faded. "Forgive me, Beatrice." Miss Marple looked up quietly. Beatrice's lips trembled. "I think he meant my husband. The doctor." She pressed her hands to her face. "I don't know what to do." The clock ticked, steady, merciless. Miss Marple spoke softly. "Truth always knocks twice, my dear. First with guilt, then with courage. You must decide which one you'll answer." Beatrice shook her head. "He'll know I came here. He always knows. The first letter, the one you found, I think it was from me. I think I wrote it. But he must have made me forget." Miss Marple's brow softened. "Fear does that," she said. "It rearranges memory until it feels merciful." Beatrice's voice broke. "He said it was for my protection, that the man in the field had threatened him, that it was an accident. But the way he spoke," her breath caught. "He was proud of it, Miss Marple. Proud. As if saving his reputation mattered more than saving a life." The candlelight flickered across her face, catching the glint of tears. Miss Marple reached forward, laying a hand gently over hers. "You've carried this long enough," she said. "You can't protect a man from the truth. It always arrives, even if it must walk barefoot through shame." Beatrice's eyes closed. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain beginning again, outside light, uncertain. Then she whispered, "He'll destroy the letter if he finds it gone. He'll know I came here." Miss Marple folded the paper neatly, sliding it into her sleeve. "Then let him look," she said, "but not in the place where truth has already settled." Beatrice stood shakily, her face pale, her breath thin. "I'll go now. I shouldn't have come." "You should have," Miss Marple said. "Fear needs a witness, or it turns cruel." Beatrice looked at her, eyes wide, full of something between gratitude and despair. "Promise me you'll tell the inspector, before morning." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "I promise." Beatrice hesitated at the door, rain glistening in her hair. Her voice was a whisper, one last fragment of courage before it broke. "He said if anyone found out it would all end tonight." Then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her. Miss Marple stood for a long time, the folded letter warm against her palm. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant, a sound like warning wrapped in patience. She turned back to the fire, her eyes steady, her heart knowing what the morning would bring. The clock struck 12. The rain thickened, and somewhere beyond the gate, a scream tore through the dark short, sharp, final. Miss Marple didn't move. Her voice came barely above a whisper. Someone wouldn't live till morning. The rain had stopped by morning, but the clouds still hung heavy over Street Mary Mead. The air felt waiting, as if the world itself expected a confession. Inspector Braithwaite had chosen the vicarage drawing room for the meeting. A proper English room, polished wood, pale curtains, the faint smell of lavender polish and old books. It was a good place for truth. Quiet, contained. No one could run from silence here. Miss Marple sat near the hearth, her knitting untouched in her lap. Her eyes moved from face to face. Dr. Thomas, Beatrice, Martha and Emily, pale from sleepless nights. Even the inspector looked uneasy, as if reason had begun to doubt itself. When the door closed, the sound carried like a final lock turning. No one spoke. No one breathed too deeply. Miss Marple began softly. "Sometimes," she said, "truth hides itself not in darkness, but in duty." The doctor shifted in his chair, a faint smile, brittle and polite. "I do hope this gathering will lead somewhere conclusive, Miss Marple. We've all been under quite enough strain." "It will," she replied gently. "Though perhaps not in the way you expect." The inspector cleared his throat. "Miss Marple believes she's uncovered something. A letter and other matters." Beatrice flinched. The doctor turned to her quickly. What letter? Her lips parted, but no words came. Miss Marple's voice remained calm. The one hidden behind your clock, doctor. The one addressed to your wife. The one written by a hand that trembled with remorse. His face paled, but his tone stayed steady. Surely you're mistaken? I've written no such thing. No, Miss Marple said. You didn't, but you asked her to. A hush followed, the kind that fills a room like smoke. She continued quietly, as if telling a bedtime story. The boy in the field, Henry, saw something that night. He discovered the affair, the secret meetings between you and Emily. He threatened to tell her mother. You met him in anger, not malice. But anger, as we both know, can be just as fatal. Dr. Thomas stood abruptly. That's absurd. His voice trembled, but his hands did not. I tried to help that young man. Help? Miss Marple's voice cut through softly. With a hammer, perhaps? Or with a confession disguised as mercy? He froze. His mouth opened, but no sound followed. His wife began to cry quietly into her hands. Miss Marple looked at her kindly. You found the letter afterward, didn't you, my dear? You tried to hide it. You thought love meant silence. But silence, Mrs. Thomas, is the cruelest accomplice of all. The inspector stepped forward. You're saying the doctor killed him, then moved the body? Yes, she said. But not alone. Beatrice helped him out of fear, out of love, out of the belief that saving his name was worth the weight of her conscience. Beatrice shook her head weakly. I didn't know he was dead. He said Henry had fallen, that it was an accident. I only helped lift him into the cart. Dr. Thomas turned toward her, voice cracking. You were never meant to know. And yet she did, Miss Marple said softly. When truth knocks twice, it always enters the second time. He sank back into his chair, eyes hollow, pride leaking away like breath. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the clock, the same one that had once hidden the letter. I didn't mean to kill him, he whispered finally. He called me a liar. He said he'd ruin me, ruin her. I lost my temper. It was one blow, only one. His eyes lifted, hollow and pleading. Do you know what it's like to spend every day healing others, then destroy a life with your own hands? Miss Marple's expression didn't change. Yes, she said softly. It's called being human. He bowed his head. Beatrice sobbed quietly beside him. Emily sat perfectly still, eyes closed, whispering something that sounded like prayer. The inspector took a slow step forward. It's over now, he said gently. Miss Marple looked toward the window. The sky was beginning to clear, faint sunlight pressing against the clouds, soft, forgiving. Over, she murmured. Perhaps for him, but not for the village. Street, Mary Mead will speak of this for years, and when they do, they'll forget the facts and remember only the faces. The doctor raised his head slightly, one last breath of pride left in him. I wanted perfection, he said quietly, but it wouldn't stay still. Miss Marple nodded, almost sadly. Perfection never does, doctor. Then she folded her hands, her gaze settling on the floor, where the faint ring of sunlight touched the edge of the carpet. No one spoke again. No one moved. And silence fell like judgment. The dawn came softly over Street Mary Mead. Not golden, not bright, just pale and quiet, as though the sun itself knew to tread gently. Mist hung low over the hedges. The village stirred in fragments. A door opened, a kettle whistled, a curtain moved. Life was beginning again, but slower this time, as if holding its breath between heartbeats. Miss Marple sat by her window, shawl drawn close, the morning paper unopened on her lap. She hadn't slept much. Truth, once spoken, rarely lets a house rest the same night. Down the lane, the constable's motor car hummed past, carrying its burden. The doctor, silent in the back seat, his head bowed, his hands still. No defiance left now, just the long, heavy stillness of acceptance. Beatrice had gone quietly too, escorted by Mrs. Pritchard, a woman broken, not wicked. Miss Marple had seen such faces before, those who sin through love, not cruelty. They were always the ones who wept for others more than themselves. She turned her gaze toward the Thomas house. It stood unchanged white walls, tidy roses, perfect curtains, yet somehow it already looked older, as though grief had stepped inside and rearranged the air. The inspector had come by earlier, hat in hand, his tone softened with fatigue. "We've got their statements," he said. "Enough for the court, I'd think." Then, after a pause, he'd added quietly, "I don't envy the judge." Miss Marple only nodded. "Judgment," she said softly, "never begins in a courtroom, Inspector. It begins in the heart and ends there too." He'd smiled faintly, tipping his hat before leaving. Now his footsteps were only a memory, fading into the morning calm. She rose, crossing the room with slow precision, and set the teacup beside the window. Outside, Mrs. Barton was already sweeping her front path. Habit was the villagers' medicine. When life wounded them, they reached for routine, the broom, the garden, the tea, and in their quiet way, they healed. Miss Marple watched a robin hop across the fence, bright against the pale light. Even he seemed subdued, his song smaller, careful. Her mind wandered back to the doctor's final words. "I wanted perfection," he'd said. She understood that, perhaps more than anyone guessed. Perfection had destroyed many, but the desire for it always began from something good. The wish to keep things whole. The wish to protect. Until protection turned to silence. And silence became sin. She sighed, her breath misting the glass. People often thought wickedness wore a face, sharp, cruel, easy to name. But more often it wore gentleness, a smile, a sense of duty, a fear of shame. Outside, Emily walked slowly down the path toward the churchyard. Black dress, head bowed. Beside her, Martha leaned on a cane, her grief carried not in sound, but in the rhythm of her steps. Mother and daughter, two shadows joined by loss. Miss Marple didn't go to them. Some griefs needed to move alone to find their own pace toward forgiveness. She returned to her chair, the ticking clock marking time once more. The same sound as before, yet not the same world. The letter lay folded in her drawer. It would stay there a while, not for secrecy, but for remembrance. Evidence belonged to the law, but memory belonged to mercy. She looked toward the field beyond her garden. From here it seemed peaceful again, dew glistening like glass, the wind bending the grass in long, slow breaths. You'd never know what it had held. The earth forgets faster than people do. The church bell rang faintly in the distance. The sound drifted across the village, not heavy this time, just tired. As if even the bell had cried enough. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound pass through her. Her voice came quietly, half thought, half prayer. "Peace returns," she said, but never the same peace. The clock ticked on, the mist began to lift, and somewhere, far beyond the hedgerows, a new morning waited still, patient, unknowing. The morning drifted slowly into afternoon. Sunlight pushed through the thinning mist, gentle and golden, like forgiveness arriving late but still welcome. Miss Marple was in her garden again. The same garden where she had begun tidy rows of lavender, a teapot steaming on the small table beside her, the same shawl around her shoulders, the same calm, though not quite the same peace. Birds were back at the feeder. The cat from the vicarage stretched lazily near the hedge. To anyone passing by, it was just another quiet morning in Street Mary Mead. But she knew better. Quiet was never just quiet here. It was the space where truth caught its breath. She poured her tea, slow and steady, watching the steam curl upward. It looked like memory rising, fading, then returning again in softer shapes. The paper lay folded beside her, headlines too heavy for the calm they sat in. Local physician charged. She didn't need to read the rest. The village had already whispered it from gate to gate, soft as confession, quick as rain. Children still played by the green. The postman still whistled the same tune. But even laughter now carried an echo of something wiser. Street Mary Mead had aged a little overnight. They all had. Miss Marple lifted her cup, her reflection rippling in the surface. How curious, she thought, how easily good people lose their footing not from wickedness, but from love, pride, fear. Those three always the same culprits, dressed in new faces. She thought of Beatrice, of her trembling hands, her whispered truth, her courage born too late. She thought of the doctor, brilliant, exact, so afraid of blemish that he created one himself, and of Emily, whose silence would echo longer than words ever could. Life, Miss Marple decided, was a far subtler mystery than murder. It was not who struck the blow, but why the heart guided the hand. She smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed on the horizon. "You can't heal what you refuse to touch," she murmured. The words slipped out like breath, gentle, certain. No sermon, no scolding, just truth, sitting softly in the air. The church bell rang in the distance. 3 notes, slow and hollow, rolling through the village like a sigh. It was the same bell she'd heard that first morning, but this time it didn't sound like warning, it sounded like release. A breeze stirred the lavender. The scent rose, clean and familiar. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. For a moment, she could almost hear the voices again. The gossip, the laughter, the footsteps through wet grass. Life was already rebuilding itself, one cup of tea at a time. The kettle whistled from her kitchen, right on cue. Some things, thankfully, remained predictable. Miss Marple stood, stretching a little, her joints stiff but her mind light. She gathered her cup, her saucer, and the newspaper, each movement slow, deliberate, full of meaning. Before she turned toward the door, she looked back once more at the lane. Sunlight danced on puddles. A robin sang. The world, it seemed, had forgiven itself again. She smiled, that quiet, knowing smile that carried both sorrow and peace. "Every ending," she said softly, "leaves a small beginning hiding under its sleeve." She stepped inside, her silhouette framed for a moment in the doorway, a figure of calm in a village that would never quite be the same. The door closed gently, the kettle quieted, and the last curl of steam from her teacup rose toward the window, twisting like a question that didn't need answering. Somewhere far off, the church bell chimed again, lighter now, brighter. It faded into the air like a promise the day would keep. Miss Marple's voice lingered soft, certain, almost smiling. Somewhere, in another quiet village, another truth waits.